Hello writers, I'm Renee Latulippe with the Lyrical Language Lab, and I'm back with another episode of Peek and Critique with 2 more rhyming picture book snippets, so stay tuned. Hey, okay, I've got 2 more rhyming picture book critique snippets to look at today. As always, these are critiques off the top of my head. These are cold readings, and I'm just giving my gut reactions on the spot. So of course, I'm not going to get every single detail, but I do hope you find these helpful nonetheless. If you would like to submit your writing for critique, you'll find a link to do just that in the description below. And if you find this content helpful, do me a favor and hit the little subscribe button right there on the screen. And don't forget to stay tuned for the writing prompt at the end of the video. Okay, let's take a look at our first submission for today. We have Wind Wants to Play by Candace Spizzieri. Wind listens in when the fallen leaves say, "It's been a long time, kids. Come out and let's play. The weather is wonderful, crisp but not cold. You're welcome to jump in our crimson and gold." Aiden and Hannah respond to the call, grabbing their sweaters in no time at all. They pull on their shoes and then lace them up tight and race from the house into soft autumn light. Wind is intrigued, so she follows behind to see what they'll do with the leaves that they find. Wind watches amazed as the children rush in. With blissful creating, let magic begin. The kids shape the colorful leaves in their play. They chuckle and cheer, singing, "Woohoo, hooray!" Wind sees them piling bright leaves to the skies. "I want to play too," she rambunctiously cries. "Look," Aiden calls, "it's a dinosaur, sis. I bet you can't make something cooler than this." Hannah's unfazed as she fashions a tale. "A dragon," she says, "and a huge humpback whale." Wonderful. I think that you probably heard that the meter is excellent in this. So well done, Candace, on a very, very consistent meter. I mean, it just flows very, very nicely. There might be a couple of tiny little things to look at, and so let's just do that. I'm going to scan it first to see what our dominant meter is, and we'll go from there. So we have Wind, who is a personified character in this snippet. So we have Wind listens, oops, I'm doing it backwards. Let's start with the stressed beat. Wind listens in when the fallen leaves say, let's see, "It's been a long time, kids. Come out and let's play." You see that consistency going on there? "The weather is wonderful, crisp but not cold. You're welcome to jump in our crimson and gold." I'm going to do a second stanza because I want to point something out in a minute. So let's just do the second stanza. Aiden and Hannah respond to the call. Maybe you're noticing a difference here. Grabbing their sweaters in no time at all. And here's another variation. They pull on their shoes and then lace them up tight and race from the house into soft autumn light. Okay, so I'm going to stop there because really the whole thing is very consistent. But let's take a look at what's happening here. In the very first line, we start on that stressed beat. Wind listens in when the fallen leaves say. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 stressed beats. So that makes this tetrameter. Okay, it's got 4 beats in the line. This one, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're counting only stressed beats, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so we know it's tetrameter all the way through. Every single line has 4 stressed beats. But what we see here is that this one starts with a stressed beat and then 2 unstressed. And that pattern carries through. The next 3 start with an unstressed, and then we're back to that stressed with 2 unstressed following. In the second stanza, the first 2 lines start with a stressed beat, and then the last 2 lines have that little extra unstressed beat at the beginning. So, what is this meter? I'm going to say it is dactylic, tetrameter. Dactylic being stressed, unstressed, unstressed, all right? Now, you might be confused if you look at this and say, but there's those extra unstressed beats there. And yes, there are. But if you really look closely, the dominant meter here is definitely dactylic. And you can tell also by the rhythm. It's got a very driving rhythm. Wind listens in when the fallen leaves say, it's been a long time, kids. You can clap it out. Then we've got Aiden and Hannah respond to the call. It's definitely got that driving, marching beat to it. It pushes the words and the reader forward. So for me, it's definitely a dactylic dominant meter. These extra unstressed beats, are they allowed? Yes, they are. They really are. So you don't have to worry too much about that. This works really well in dactylic meter because, as you can see, every single line ends on a stressed beat. All right, and what does that mean? If this were a full dactylic foot, this last one here, it would have 2 more unstressed beats, right? But we call this a truncated foot. So she's got the stressed part of it, so the whole foot counts. So that's what makes it tetrameter. Even if she's missing those last 2 unstressed beats, it's still a dactyl. It's just a truncated dactyl. And that is a really common thing in dactylic meter and trochaic meter that both end on unstressed syllables, to lop off at the very end of the line those last unstressed syllables. And that is why the unstressed syllable at the beginning of the next line works so well. Because it's almost kind of like a carryover, you know? It's like I'm doing my division, it's like a remainder of 1. And I've carried that over to the next line. And that's why it flows. There's just nothing wrong with this whatsoever. Plus, there's also a rule that you can add a certain number of extra unstressed beats in your metered verse per line. And if you start doing that, it becomes really just a matter of balance. If you do it too much, then it kind of throws you all out of whack and your meter becomes inconsistent. But if you do it, you know, now and then to sort of fill out a little bump, it can work very, very well. And it is absolutely allowed. Let's say allowed, because it is a rule. How many you can add in your lines of verse. Again, I try to moderate, you know, keep it moderate and make sure I don't overdo that kind of thing. But this works beautifully. It flows beautifully. Again, because we've got that truncated dactyl foot in the line above, and so let's just say we're going to carry over one of those unstressed beats down below, and that's why it works. So again, Candace, this is very consistent all the way through, so let's just take a look at some words and some phrases in here that stopped me a little tiny bit. Wind listens in with falling sands. Come out, let's play. I don't have anything in this first stanza. I think it's pretty solid. At first, I did stumble a tiny bit on come out and let's play, wondering, do we need let's? But then when I realized that, you know, that this is really a dactylic meter, we do need it. It doesn't sound right, I think. Wind listens in when the fallen leaves say, it's been a long time, kids, come out and play. That would be missing something. So it must have just been a little passing weirdness on my part. Then we have Aiden and Hannah respond to the call, grabbing their sweaters in no time at all. This phrase here, I feel, is a little bit fillerish. I think you can do better on that part right there. Remember that when we're writing picture books, we have a very, very limited number of words at our disposal. So every line becomes expensive real estate, all right? So we want to make sure, as I've said in the past, we want to make sure that on that real estate, we're building mansions and not little houses or little, you know, shacks or whatever. So think about that line. What can you put in there? Because in no time at all, I can't picture it. I really can't. It's not like lickety split. Lickety split already gives me a feeling like, ooh, they're zipping, they're zooming, they can't wait to get outside. In no time at all, it's kind of like, you know, it doesn't really create an image for me. They're like, yeah, well, they put them on, you know, no big deal. So look at that line and see what you can come up with that is more active. You might even think about, you know, instead of the time, you might think about what kind of sweaters are they putting on? Are they completely encasing themselves in wool? What are they doing? So, you know, you can play with different alternatives. See what comes up. See what, you know, floats your boat the most there. Is it going to be like a lickety split type of thing, or a big woolen sweater type of thing? You know, that's the beauty of it. I mean, you've got all sorts of options to make that more interesting for the reader, more of an image. They pull on their shoes and then lace them up tight and race from the house into soft autumn light. That's a really lovely image. I also try to get rid as much as possible of ands and thens and ands and thens and ands and thens, because it gets to be too much of a, and then they did this, and then they did this, and then they did this, and then they did that. So when possible, you know, I really look at those. Is there a way I can take that out to tighten it up, to add something that's more interesting than an and, than a conjunction? In fact, even here, I wonder if you even need this then. You know, it's perfect meter-wise. They pull on their shoes and then lace them up tight. But what if you took that out and just had a little tiny caesura right there? They pull on their shoes and lace them up tight. It works for me. You know, you really would just be taking out one of these little unstressed beats here. So it's a small variation that keeps the readers on their toes a little bit, but without tripping them up. And then we get rid of one of those thens, right? They pull on their shoes, they lace them up tight. You could even do that, you know, with a semicolon or a dash, or again, just they pull on their shoes and lace them up tight without the then. And then we have again, and then, this and here. How can we fix that? Maybe we could change this into a gerund, like a racing or something like that, to get rid of that and. So these, again, little tiny things, but it really helps tighten up the language, you know, to keep it moving forward without a lot of these little interjections, these little conjunctions that don't really add anything. Wind is intrigued, so she follows behind to see what they'll do with the leaves that they find. Wind watches, amazed, as the children rush in. With blissful creating, let magic begin. I love the magic. I don't love the blissful creating. I can't picture it. What is that? What is that? What does it look like? What does blissful creating look like? As an adult, yes, I can imagine the kids are all like, yay, it's so much fun. We're building a house with leaves. I mean, I did the same. I can totally relate to that, but I'm an adult. I think a kid reading blissful creating or hearing blissful creating read to her, I think it'll just pass right over without creating any sort of image whatsoever. So I would want something, I would look at that, give yourself some options, see what you brainstorm, see what you come up with to, again, make this also more active and more of a concrete image. Right now it's quite abstract. So we want to get this concrete in there. They're rushing in, right? So what are they doing? What does this blissful creating look like? You know, are they throwing leaves in the air? Are they kicking them around? Are they raking them into a maze? You know, what is it exactly that is creating that magic? The kids shape the colorful leaves in their play. They chuckle and cheer. All right, again, I am being very nitpicky, Candace. Very, very nitpicky. But, how can I tell you? Chuckle. Do kids chuckle? This one stopped me because really, right in my head as I read it, I was like, chuckle. Chuckle, I know you want to go for that alliteration, chuckle and cheer. And of course, it sounds wonderful. But I would look at that verb in particular. Chuckle to me sounds like something when you share maybe an off-color joke or something like, did you hear that? I don't picture kids chuckling. You know, I picture them giggling for sure. Snickering even, although snickering has a bit of a meanness to it. And they're cheering. So they're really super happy at this point. They're singing, you know, they're saying woohoo and hooray. So I would look at the chuckle and see if we can get something that's more kid-like for that verb. And also here, you know, once you've looked at this part of the line, see what if you need both woohoo and hooray. Perhaps you could, you know, give us more information about how they're singing. Are they jumping? Give me something else that they're doing, something active, so that, again, we can use this expensive real estate not with two words that are the same, woohoo and hooray, but with something else that adds to the image of what these kids are doing. And then we just have hooray, for example. Wind sees them piling bright leaves to the skies. I want to play too, she rambunctiously cries. I'm not a big fan of adverbs, but I do like this. I think it's kind of fun, and it's a really fun word. Plus, points for a long word, rambunctiously. We've got a nice 4-syllable word in there, and I'm all for challenging vocabulary in picture books. I like it. So I'm okay with that. Piling is a weird word. It's one of those things that are, they always stop me. Words like pile, fire, while, anything with I followed by an L or an R, basically. Wind sees them piling bright leaves to the skies. With your meter, this needs to be only 2 syllables. For me, it's 3. Wind sees them piling bright leaves to the skies. Of course, then I can go back and I can get it how you want me to say it and how maybe it is supposed to be said, but for me, it's 3. So again, those are weird words for me personally, could be for other people. Often these things are regional, but again, I always look at those words askance. I want to play too, she rambunctiously cries. Look, Aiden calls, it's a dinosaur, sis. This stanza worked really nicely. Hannah's unfazed. I like this competition that's happening here, and she creates 2 cool things instead of just 1 cool thing. So that I think works really nicely. So let's just take a quick look at the big picture on this. Again, I'm only seeing these little snippets of things, so I can only go on what's in front of me. But for me, this seems like it's going to be a poem picture book about autumn, an autumn poem. A poem picture book creates a world that takes the reader on a little journey from the beginning until the end. And a poem picture book, like anything else, has to have an arc. So it can't just be a poem with pretty images and that's it. It has to take us on some sort of a journey, just like a story. It just doesn't have all those fully developed story elements that a story picture book has. So again, Candace, I don't know what your intention is with this particular work. For me right now, looking at it, it does feel like a poem picture book. And if it is, I think you're on a good trajectory with this. If this is our first 5 stanzas, it is taking me, I'm seeing what's going on. I've got 2 kids, I'm watching them play, and I'm engaged in what they're making, and I can relate to it. So I'm going to want to see if this continues as a poem picture book. You know, what is the arc? What happens next? You know, a little drama can be introduced, a little problem of some sort, or some sort of crescendo, and then your diminuendo, right? That takes you to the end of the book. And sometimes there's also a little twist in these poem picture books as well. If it is not a poem picture book and it's a story picture book, then you need to step back and figure out where is the story and when does it start. Because so far it hasn't really started. But again, I don't think that's what you're doing here. I think it is a poem picture book, in which case, brava, and just continue on just like you are. And I think you're going in a very good direction here. So thank you so much for sharing this with us and for allowing me to give my 2 cents. All right. So let's move on to our second example for today, which is Farm Song by Susan Johnston Taylor. Let's give it a read. As moonlight dances through the trees, the crickets chirp and cheep, a choir of insect harmonies to sing the farm to sleep. While in the barn hooves tap and drum as chicks and piglets croon, then ducks and donkeys gently hum a catchy, calming tune. The cattle join in right on key, these barnyard lullabies, till rooster's trumpet revelry greets morning's next sunrise. Well, this is lovely, Susan. Again, Susan sent this in as a snippet of a rhyming picture book. So I'm going on that description to see what we have here. Again, reading it, the meter seemed very consistent and gentle and lovely. So let's see what we have here. We're going to start with an unstressed beat. As moonlight dances through the trees, and it's looking iambic. The crickets chirp and cheep. A choir of insect harmonies to sing the farm to sleep. So clearly we have a very consistent iambic meter, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in the first and third lines. So those are iambic tetrameter. And we have 3 in the second and fourth line. So that is iambic trimeter. So we have an alternating meter. Tetrameter, trimeter, tetrameter, trimeter. And as the rhyme scheme, we have trees, cheap, harmonies, sleep. So Susan is going for an AB rhyme scheme, which is wonderful. Hard to maintain for a very long time, at least for me. I've always had a little bit of trouble with it because sometimes you can really paint yourself into a corner with these more difficult rhyme schemes. So she is rhyming the first and third lines and the second and fourth lines in every stanza. Drum, hum, croon, tune, key, revelry, lullabies, sunrise. And she's got some nice harmonies, some nice multi-syllable rhymes in here. So really, really nicely done on both meter and rhyme in this, Susan. Let's take a look, since really I have nothing to say about the meter. It is beautifully consistent. Let me look at this one because it looks longer. Let's just, take a quick look here. While in the barn hooves tap and drum, as chicks and piglets croon, then ducks and donkeys gently hum. Yeah, totally consistent. So let's just take a look at a couple little doodads that came to my attention as I was reading. As moonlight dances through the trees, the crickets chirp and cheep, a choir of insect harmonies to sing the farm to sleep. I think this first stanza is just beautiful, really. You've created some really concrete images. I can see the moonlight in the trees. I can hear the crickets chirping. I love the idea of a choir of insect harmonies. That's really lovely. To sing the farm to sleep. So I know what's happening. You've given me a setting. You've given me sounds. You're playing to my senses. So I think this is a really successful stanza. You've really gotten me into the story and engaged my senses. So let's look at the next one. Well, in the barn, hooves tap and drum. So now we've moved from outside to inside. So we've got already in the second stanza, we've got a movement going on. Hooves is one of those, again, a weird word for me. Is it hooves or hooves? I don't know. It slowed me down a little bit. And I don't know if that's a bad thing, but it did slow me down. While in the barn, hooves tap and drum. So we've got hooves, and I'm picturing, cows and mules and horses and whatnot, and those are pretty heavy. So I'm wondering, do they tap? I could picture possibly drumming, but I feel, tapping seems a little too light. I guess a pig's hooves could tap because they're more like clickety clickety, they're smaller. Again, these are the weird things that come into my head. Do kids chuckle? Do hooves tap? Things I think about, things that keep me up at night. But it's something to look at, to make sure that our verbs are matching, our nouns, basically, in this case. As chicks and piglets croon, again, don't know if those things can croon, but I'm willing to suspend my disbelief, and why not? We've got a whole bunch of singing animals and insects, so I'm okay with that. Then ducks and donkeys gently hum. We've got our musical barn going on here, a catchy, calming tune. Catchy and calming kind of seem a little at odds with each other, because catchy makes me think of like, da-da-da, something a little more upbeat, but this is a calming lullaby. A lullaby can still be catching. Again, things that keep me up at night. The cattle join in right on key. See, here's a little variation on the meter that did, give me pause, but a very slight pause. So I wouldn't worry too much about this, but I wanted to bring it up just to look at it. If I'm going for, your beautifully consistent iambic, then I'm going to look at this. The cattle join in right on key. The cattle join in right on key. But would we say that really? Do we say join in, or do we say join in? The cattle join in right on key. So for me, this line is really the cattle join in right on key. You see that variation there? I don't dislike this variation. I don't have a problem with it. It didn't make me stumble, but I did notice it. So that's just something to think about. Because again, these verb phrases, join in, I don't think we say join in. I'm going to join in. I'm going to join in. Oh, can I join in? the stress is really on the in. So either you keep it and let the variation stay as it is, get some other opinions on this. Again, when, especially writing in verse, have many people read it. If the same, people are saying the same thing about the same line, then that probably means you've got an issue to look at. This for me does have this variation. It doesn't bother me personally, but if it makes other people stumble, then you probably will have to revise it. These barnyard lullabies. Till rooster's trumpet revelry greets morning's next sunrise. And this is the only thing in here that I would say must be revised without question. Because what's happening here is a mess with the stress, which is one of my rhyme crimes, messing with the stress. Because it's not sunrise, it's not sunrise, it's sunrise, right? That's how we say the word. Oh, look at the beautiful sunrise. So in order to get to the rhyme on lullabies, I have to say sunrise, and that just doesn't work because it's you're messing with the stress there. The cattle join in right on key, these barnyard lullabies, till rooster's trumpet revelry greets morning's next sunrise. Do you see how that's not really natural? Because the natural stress is on sun in that word, and we can't change the natural stress of a word to fit our rhyme scheme. So this would need to be revised, which kind of puts you in a hard spot because you've got your lullabies and your sunrise. Again, that's why sometimes these rhyme schemes can really paint us into a corner. But I'm sure you can come up with something to fix that up. So what else do we have here? I wanted to look at the progression of this. Again, like Candace's piece, I think that this is another poem picture book. And again, I pulled these at random from the pool of submissions that I have, and they both just happen to be, at least for me, poem picture books rather than story picture books. So for me, again, this is going to be a picture book length poem that takes us on a journey through a nighttime farm scene. And of course, again, we're going to need to have an arc. We need a beginning and a middle and end, just like any picture book. It's just that we won't have that plot and the obstacles and the resolutions and all those usual story elements. Okay, so if this is a poem picture book, if it's a story picture book, then we haven't gotten into the story yet, and we're already 3 stanzas in. But again, I don't think that's where you're going. Like Candace, I think you're doing a poem picture book. And if that's the case, and I'm going to assume it is, we have to look at the progression here of what's happening. So in the very first stanza, we're outside. We're looking at the moon in the trees. We're listening to the crickets chirp. Crickets for me denote dusk. So that's giving me a time frame here where we're beginning the story, the poem. And we've got those harmonies, and they're singing the farm to sleep. So maybe dusk is a little early to be going to sleep, but maybe it's summer and dusk comes quite late. So maybe it's already 9 o'clock, 9:30. That's a good bedtime for the animals, I think. So I'm going to go with that. So we're at dusk and it's summer. This is what I've got in my head now. Now we're moving into the barn. So we've progressed from outside, and now we're zooming in to the barn to see what's happening inside. And in there we've got, they're singing this cool tune, this calming lullaby, and they're all in on it. And I'm good with that too. So they're singing themselves to sleep. Okay, so far so good. Now we've got the third stanza. The cattle join in. I'm going to assume that the cattle are again outside, and we're hearing them, the herd. We're hearing the herd from outside. These barnyard lullabies. And then till rooster's trumpet revelry greets morning's next sunrise. Where did that come from? All right, this is where I get stuck. This needs to come way later if this is indeed a picture book length poem, because we've only just fallen asleep. In fact, we haven't fallen asleep yet. Everybody's still singing. So there's no sleeping going on here. There's singing. We're still at the lullaby stage. And then all of a sudden, cock-a-doodle-doo, there's the rooster waking everybody up, but they haven't fallen asleep yet. So you see my issue here? something's got to happen in here before Mr. Rooster comes in and wakes everybody up. So if this were just a poem, you did build this as a poem picture book snippet, not as a standalone poem. If this were simply a poem, I would still have the same thing. I was like, well, okay, well, they're still singing lullabies and now the rooster's interrupting them saying it's time to get up. That doesn't make sense to me. So even if it were a standalone poem and not a poem-length picture book, I still want something here. There's a lot of stuff missing here for me between the singing and the waking up. All right, so again, if you got this poem-length picture book happening, I need to know what's happening between these lullabies. I'm going to assume they're going to go to sleep. What happens as they sleep? I don't know how you're going to carry this for an entire 32-page picture book, but something's got to happen in here. I need the rest of the story in here, Susan. That's what's missing. I think, it's beautiful. You clearly have a great handle on rhyme and meter and imagery. The language is lovely. So just fill it out and see where it takes you. See what kind of story can come out of this for you. Even if it's a poem picture book, we still need that arc. So play with it, experiment, brainstorm, and see where it leads you. You have a really nice start here. So I hope you keep going. And thank you so much for submitting to Peek and Critique as well. All right, now that is it for today's episode. So let's get to our writing prompt. So I pulled the two examples for today at random and thought it was kind of interesting that both of them happen to be poem picture books and that they are both related to nature. So obviously nature is an evergreen topic. So for the writing prompt for today, write the opening lines of a picture book in which nature plays a major part. So these can be your opening 2 verses of a rhyming picture book or your opening few lines of a prose picture book. But either way, make sure nature plays a prominent part. Thanks for joining me here again at Peek and Critique. Please do check out my other videos in which I take a look at other rhyming picture book snippets, prose picture book snippets, and even children's poetry, and of course at the Book Look series, which I'll be adding to in the weeks to come. See you next time.